Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dishing with Stephanie's Dish podcast. I am here with John Cannell, and he is the author of the Preppy Kitchen cookbook. Now, I feel like Preppy Kitchen is such a complete statement because it makes me think of all the things about you right off the bat. Congratulations on a great moniker and on a well-titled cookbook.
Oh, thank you. Preppy Kitchen, super easy.
Yeah, and like, do you identify with that just in terms of, I mean, I'm looking at you. You're pretty cute. You seem like a preppy person.
I suppose I do, but I used to be a math and science teacher, and I dealt with all these kids. It's kind of a long story, but I dealt with kids who had all this math anxiety and science anxiety too. They thought like I am an English person or I love history, but I cannot do it. My brain doesn't work this way. And I was teaching middle schoolers, and they already had this sense of failure ingrained in them, and it was heartbreaking. Like later on in life, when I switched careers and I pivoted over, I saw the same thing for people in the kitchen. They're like, I'm a baker, I cannot cook, or I'm fine on the grill, can't bake anything, or I just use my credit card and call it a day. No, same thing with my kids. Like, you can do it. Let's just be prepared. Let's have all the steps laid out and everything else. So it's kind of a play on words. It's about being prepared in the kitchen and having like a fun, easy time, not anxiety inducing train wreck where you're like halfway through a recipe and you're like, I don't have this ingredient. What do I do? You know?
Okay, I'm just going to back up for a second because your aesthetic is really appealing to me in lots of ways. Number one, just talking to you and the way you have your background set, awesome.
Thank
Number
you.
two, the photographs in the book and the photographs on your Instagram and on your site are also incredibly beautiful. Are you doing all this by yourself? Do you just have this lifestyle persona hidden inside you as a math and science teacher? Come on.
Well, I used to do it all by myself back in the day, but to answer part of your question like in pieces, I was an art major. So I was a math and science teacher, but UCLA and had like a fine arts degree. So I was about color theory and putting things together and conceptual art. So my career path has gone all over the place. And now, I find that as business gets busier and my kids get older, I have two 7-year-old boys, they're twins, that whatever someone else can do that can free me up to like spend more time with my family or do things that only I can do, I'll outsource. So the book number one and book number two were both shot by David Milosh, who's like a wonderful photographer. For styling here, like I do like to collect antique copper and stuff like that. Seals, but there's a community that comes together.
I love antique copper, and I also actually kind of like cooking with it, but cleaning of it and the maintaining of it is like a full-time job.
Like you have to just understand, like most antique copper is tinned on the inside. So you might just have to get it retinned every once in a while. Or if you found a piece for like $5 at a flea market and it's falling apart, you're gonna say, okay, this is $5 plus the retinning cost, and then it'll be good as new because copper, old copper is so heavy, it's gonna conduct the heat really beautifully. And part of being prepared and having the right tools is like, having a nice pot or pan, a nice heavy one that conducts heat evenly, because you could be following a recipe perfectly to the T. Everything is right, but you had one of those like a sad pot that has paper thin walls that scorches everything, and your food's kind of, it's not ruined, but it's not as good as it could be just because of the tool you had.
You're speaking to the choir. I'm at my summer place and I'm working on a cookbook, and we got a new stove like last year, and we have to buy our place is super little, so we had to buy this specific size stove,
Yeah.
and it is just the worst. Like everything I cook for the cookbook burns. There's so many hot spots in it. It's 75 degrees off. And I'm just like,
Oh
okay, I
dear.
don't know if I can cook a cookbook and test all these recipes with this horrible stove.
No,
So yeah, it's been
that's not
challenging.
cool. Not cool at
Um,
all.
when when you, besides your fancy French copper cookware, do you have like anything that you recommend for just the basics? I
If you
like I always recommend all clad, but that's a kind
I
of
was gonna say
easy
all
one.
clad because it kind of just lasts. It's like indestructible, lasts forever, and it's expensive, but I will have the all clad until I don't know what happens to me. But
Yeah, same.
you just clean it with some steel wool if it gets really singed, and it's fine. And then
Yeah.
also you can find some like nice cast iron enameled like Dutch ovens or something. You can get them secondhand, and if they're in good shape, they'll last forever. So those are like investment pieces that really make your time in the kitchen a lot easier.
Agreed. Now you're on your second book here. Can you give me the transition from math and science teacher to cookbook author? Did you just love cooking?
I grew up in the kitchen with my mom. So I always had my mom taught chef. And my mom came from a very small town in Mexico where like everything was made fresh every single day. And she came to this country with a love of fresh flavors and ingredients and learning. She never wanted to stop learning. So she explored the world through her kitchen and cookbooks and recipes she clipped out. And I got to be there on that journey with her and learn a lot from her. So, and she was a teacher and retired as one. So I followed her footsteps and became a teacher. And when my husband and I were planning a family, because it takes a lot of planning, we were thinking who's going to be home. And, my job had specific breaks, but you can't show up to school late. So if your kid is sick or something happens, he really encouraged me to do a pivot. And he's like, you love teaching, but you really are passionate about food. Like that's what you kind of light up when you talk about. So he's like, I see people like having food blogs and they can make that a career. So why don't we like try that out and you can work from home and be there more often. So I really credit him for helping me do that because it was really taking a chance. It ended up working out pretty well.
And I mean, congratulations on the books, and your story of your mom is pretty inspiring. She sounds like a really neat lady.
She really
But
is.
that is, I think, how a lot of us get started. And the being a cookbook writer is probably more possible now than it was before because of digital creation and social media, to be honest.
Yeah.
Did you always have a knack for that too? Because many people are great with like the food or the recipes, but they're not so great at the digital side. And then there's people that are great at the digital side, but maybe their recipes aren't the best.
Part of me thinks I was horrible at everything when I started, except like I could make a delicious dish, the funny thing is I went to art school, but like my photography classes were conceptual art photography classes, and there was no skill. Like if you wanted to have any skill learned, you'd speak to a technician, and the teacher was just there for the discourse of art and like different references. And it's a lovely conversation. I enjoyed it, but it gave me zero preparation for shooting food and making it look attractive because it's very difficult to look tasty. Even as I mean, it's hard. And if you scrolled all the way back on my Instagram, you would see some very tragic looking things. And I was, so proud of them at the time. So it's
Yeah, and I do
hard.
think like the authenticity of the not so perfect photos too. Certainly not for a book, but we kind of had these whole curated Instagram feeds and lives. And I do feel like we're getting away from that a little bit in a way that appeals to me just because it feels more democratic for everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, I am a bit of a klutz. I'm going to acknowledge this. So for me, that part comes out on my YouTube channel where I'm making things and like, oh, something falls or like the I made eclairs 10 million times. It's my favorite thing, but I'm filming it and they fall down because I added like a little bit too much egg that day, or the eggs were a little bit on the larger side than I was used to. And I mean, I will show that. I don't edit it out. So I'll say like,
Same.
and but now let's just come back and say, could you use these? Yes, they're still going to be delicious. They're not going to make someone French happy, but you will eat them, or we can remake them. And let me show you the correct amount of egg right now. Or a
Oh,
cake
I love that.
in the fridge.
No, I absolutely love that. I have done two horrible videos. One, I cut my head off, but I really liked what I made, so I
Uh-huh.
kept it in. It's the headless shrub making. And then the second, I had a absolute whipped cream failure where it like just went like this all over my whole kitchen.
Oh no.
And I just left it because I was like, well, I've done that once with soup where I Vitamixed it and it was too hot and it blew out all over. And now with whipped cream. So I think people actually appreciate that because it makes them feel like they can do it too.
Yeah. And also, like whipped cream is actually quite difficult because in the US, there's all these additives and every brand is a little bit different. If you go abroad and you make a whipped cream with like a double cream or something else, It takes longer to whip, but when it does, it's a beautiful consistency. And depending on what's been added or how it's been ultra pasteurized, it can become kind of chunky very easily.
Yeah. Okay. So yes. Also
Wasn't too
cooking
far.
with well, and your mom being from Mexico and probably you traveling all over too. Cooking all over in different places is weird. We travel a lot by boat. So cooking in a small space boat kitchen with, butter from all over, different goat butters, and just like, oh my gosh, this is unique. Let's talk about specific recipes in your book and give me like your top five that you feel really attached to.
Well, okay, so on the back cover, I'm gonna start sweet. In the book, I have the perfect birthday cake, which is like a beautiful vanilla melt in your mouth cake. But on the back cover is what I actually make for my birthday for myself. And it's a lemony Italian olive oil cake, 2 layers with a crunchy sugar topping, and in between and on top, a mountain of mascarpone stabilized whipped cream with lots of fresh berries. It's like just perfectly sweet, has that wonderful consistency, and it's a very simple cake to make. So, you know, it's a good example of something delicious, something visually stunning, doesn't have to be difficult, doesn't have to be time consuming, and you can really make it your own. One of the side dishes that I am very attached to is part of my Sunday dinners growing up, and it's a Greek style spicy tomato orzo. It goes with everything. Like we would have it with a roast chicken or a big garlic studded leg of lamb and a salad. But you can have it a million different ways. It's silky, it's perfectly spicy, it has a lovely play of flavors. It does take a little bit of time, and whenever you make something saucy and pasta-y on the stovetop, it's gonna burn on the bottom and you're constantly like stirring and scraping. So my time-saving hacks for this were to start off by using Bloody Mary mix for the base, because that gives you a perfect spiced tomato
Yes.
and saves a lot of time. And then we do a little work on the stovetop and then pop it into the oven and just bakes perfectly on its own. It's so silky, perfectly saucy, and goes with everything. There's like on the cover, I have a lemony chicken pasta bake, and it's a one pan meal. There's a whole chapter of one pan meals because, you know, we don't necessarily want to feel like Cinderella every single day at the sink. And it is just a nice combination of pasta that's been cooked in a flavorful, like white wine chicken stock sauce.
Yum.
It's made creamy with a little stir of ricotta, and then you have these beautiful, big, juicy pieces of chicken, lots of sweet cherry tomatoes, lemons, squash, and it's finished off with giant dollops of ricotta. And it looks so good. It's delicious, it's decadent, and it's something you can just make really easily. And then for breakfast, there are these pear fritters where like I make recipes for a living and I enjoy all the recipes that I make because they're
Yeah.
mine. These pear fritters were so good. It was like they're so easy to make. It's basically like if you haven't made fritters, which I'm sure you have, but it's like pancake batter holding to a lot of fruit and you deep fry it. So unlike a regular donut where the yeast and the rising and it's time consuming, you can just throw this together in a few minutes. And the combination of these lovely pears with just enough golden batter holding together, drizzled with a lemony glaze, they're like you will inhale the entire batch of them.
I feel
And
like you need to have a radio or a TV show too, because one thing you're doing that's really working for me is you are making all of the food sound so absolutely delicious with your adjectives and your adverbs and just, I mean, I want to cook everything.
oh, you're too sweet. Thank you. The book starts out, by the way, like on the subject of being prepared with the pantry of convenience, because a lot of us, like I'm a little scattered, I will admit this, and I will go to the store. Do I have cinnamon? And I'll buy cinnamon. I go to my pantry and there's 8 cinnamons there. I am set, but I wanted to show people how you can set things up. Just talk about the different kinds of flours, the different kinds of sugars, like all the stuff that, we might take for granted, but when you're making a recipe or setting yourself up, you like need to have them at hand, know what they do. And, if we're talking about a chocolate chip cookie, there's a dry mix for chocolate chip cookies. So you guys have that in your pantry, hanging out. The recipe is halfway done, and you can make as many cookies as you want. And It's like a time saver. Same thing for like a chocolate cake mix. There's a pancake and waffle mix too. So you can have those in your pantry. And then we'll also talk about like different ways to like treat butter, like, European versus American butter. I love browned butter. It's one of my flavor hacks. It goes in anything. Anything that has butter, you can sub in browned butter, which is just butter that's been cooked and caramelized a bit and has lovely nutty flavor. And it gives you so much extra depth and makes everything just a little bit more special. So, of course, I'm going to talk about butter, browning it, how the different types of butter have different amounts of butter fat in them, just so you know, and what that means for your recipes. And the list goes on. And I started you off kind of to set you up for success. And then from there, we have all these easy recipes with tons of variations where you can swap out different proteins, try different sauces. You could use different like flavor combinations with spices, or if it's like a baked good, I'll show you how to make cupcakes versus like the recipe will make either a batch of cupcakes, the 8-inch, the 9-inch layer cake, or a sheet cake, and it'll give you instructions for any of those. So you can
Okay, right. That alone is impressive because my number one failing as a cook is pan conversion.
it takes some math. So many times,
This is why I'm bad at it.
so many times I wish I could go back in time to my middle school math class and say, listen to this. This is how we're going to use some math in everyday life. And the only other time that happened out of the kitchen was when I was calculating how much flooring material to buy. And I do some geometry. I was like, oh, I used geometry in real life. It's a miracle.
Spatial relationships. They're here. My
Yeah.
daughter, we were working on a project that we had to map out where we were going to put some booths at an event. And she looked at me and she said, how did you do on the SAT in your spatial reasoning? And I was like, not good, not good.
Sassy.
She's pretty funny. That have inspired you, like you kind of give me a little bit of a Ina Garten vibe, and I say that in a very nice way because I feel like she's the leader of all high priestess of recipe testing. I mean, her recipes always work. They're always beautiful. They're fairly easy.
Yeah. Well, that's a very kind. The I grew up in Los Angeles, so I'm not, you know, starstruck when I see people. However, one time in New York, I was with my husband, and I saw Ina and Jeffrey walking hand in hand in the park, and it was floored.
Wow.
It's real. They're together. Like, he came down. I love her. For recipe testing, what some people don't realize, it's so important to test your recipes multiple times by multiple hands in multiple places because you can be in one like my famous example for this is I made a Victoria sponge cake recipe, right? Typically it uses self-rising flour and I made it. It's great. I sent it to a recipe tester in the South and it was falling flat, or it was like it had a little bit of a concave and it wasn't if something was off on the texture. And I was like, oh, so I kept adjusting the recipe over and over again. I was like, it's working for me. I don't know what's going on. And eventually, after some research, we found out that in the four regions of the US, there's like four big flour companies. Each one of them uses a different amount of baking powder in their self-rising flour. So if you just tried to make a self-rising flour recipe for something as finicky as a cake, where you're really trying to reduce the flour to give it a melt in your mouth consistency, it's literally impossible unless you have in your notes everything for the different flour companies. And there's like, sub brands and private labels. So we ended up just using regular flour to make it work. And you would never have known that unless you recipe test things in different places, especially with different ovens. And like you have to give proper ranges. And one of the goals is always to have things just pass multiple hands, multiple places, multiple times before they make it into the blog or the cookbook. Because if someone's trusting you with a recipe, what they're really trusting you with is their time, their money, and their moment. You're making something for your family to come together. It could be as simple as just dinner for yourself after a long day, or it's a big celebration and it's supposed to be like a show-stopping meal, and that is very daunting. So I always want to make sure it's just right and it'll be foolproof.
It is kind of heartbreaking when someone texts you or sends you a message and they're like, I made your blah, 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 but I'm a terrible cook and it didn't work out. And I always think, oh no, like I don't, I'm sorry it didn't work out, number one, but I'm more sorry that you think you're a terrible cook because of something you cooked of mine that didn't work out. Like there are so many variables, and,
Yeah.
you're trying to control all those variables, but also sometimes everything's just not controllable, right?
There, it's not the two things I will say on this podcast for the variables you can control. One, just get a kitchen scale. It'll save your life for anything baking related, or even if you're just making anything where you have to weigh things out, you will use less measuring cups, less little bowls, less everything else, and save all that washing up time if you're using a scale and just dumping it in. And you will get accurate results. If you scooped up flour from a measuring cup, you are going to add maybe like 60% more flour just by packing it in. Most people don't know that if you're using a measuring cup, you're supposed to fluff the flour in your canister, use a spoon, sprinkle it in like a gentle rain, and then level it off with a knife without compressing to get accurate results, which will give you that melt in your mouth, delicious texture that
They
you want.
scoop and sweep.
Yeah. And that's a little bit more work, a little bit more finicky. So if you just dump it in using a scale, you're saving you time. And then the other thing is just do not overmix any batter unless you're doing a bread. So I always use the mixer until I see just a couple streaks of flour and then finish it off by hand with a spatula so I can scrape it down and fold it together. So you have ultimate control and everything will be a nice texture because the texture even changes how you taste things. If it has a gummy, dense texture, those
Hmm.
your tongue just can't accept it and you miss a lot of the flavors.
So I think your advice is really solid, but I'm going to just confess. And I know, like my friend Zoe Bakes, she'll say the same thing about the kitchen scale.
Yeah.
She's like, and then you don't have to mess up another bowl and all the little dishes. But there's something about a kitchen scale that feels so mathy.
No, it's not. You just press the zero button when you're done and it starts at zero. There's no adding involved. So just tear it out. Zero, zero, zero,
Okay,
one. No math,
I
just
I
following it.
use it for my sourdough baking, and I just always feel like, oh, again with the math, like I got to figure out how much the bowl weighs, how much the this weighs, and
Just
everything.
zero it out. Put the bowl on, zero it out. And I will tell you that you might just be an intuitive cook. And like my mother just doesn't use any measuring, she just throws things in like a handful of this. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
It's a
how would I share
handful.
this? Like I
Oh,
have like
that's funny.
if I'm ever trying to get one of her recipes onto the blog or like use that as a starting point, I will it's so frustrating for her because I have to stop her at each point and then take it, weigh it out on a bowl, and then give it
Yeah,
back to her because she just doesn't weigh things out, but it comes out anyway. So maybe you're that person. You're too talented for
I
this.
don't know. We'll see. Now you've competed on some food competition shows, haven't you?
So I was a judge on Disney's Magic Bake Off, and part of the fun there was getting to do like a judges compete
Yeah.
thing, and it was really the first time I had done that like in a high stakes environment, and it was quite fun. I was working with another Disney actor who is absolutely not a cook or a baker at all. He's quite young. So I had a couple sessions giving him some like coaching moments, and he really did his best. And we pulled it together. I was so proud of our creation. Didn't
I
win,
know
but that
you're a
was fun.
teacher too, just like the way that you say that, which is so nice. Like
Thank
always lifting someone up.
thank you so much. It was fun. I mean, I didn't realize how invested I would get into it when I accepted the challenge, but I was, really going all out. It was a very elaborate cake we ended up making with like had like marzipan decorations all over it, and
Wow.
it was all had to be very timed out. 'Cause normally I have the luxury of time.
Yeah.
This I can like finicky work on something until I'm happy with it, and this was, the clock was ticking.
Would you do other TV competition shows if asked?
Maybe I could do it. Like if it was fun. I'm gonna do FoodieCon in New York this summer. And one of the challenges which I have agreed to do is like handcuffed and hangry, or I'll be handcuffed to somebody else doing something, which is just fun and kind of like,
That is fun.
silly. So I would do that. Like, yeah,
You're handcuffed too.
I'll be handcuffed to another. food person, TBD, and I get one free hand. So I'm hoping my left hand is free.
If you had to pick someone to be handcuffed with, and it can be anybody
Mhm.
that you have to cook something with, who would it be?
I know.
I mean, that's a solid bet, right?
Yes.
Because you know whatever you did would be great. We are talking with John Cannell. It is the Preppy Kitchen, super easy, 100 simple and versatile recipes. When you think about like the legacy that you're going to leave your kids, 2 7-year-old boys, are you going to teach them to cook?
They already know. I mean, honestly, they are very curious about what happens in the kitchen. And I love using my time in the kitchen as like bonding time, like my mom and I did.
Yeah,
So, we're all connected to devices as adults. My kids are like connected to their Legos. And being in the kitchen is one moment where you're really, really present. It's tactile, you're engaged, and you're making something that's memorable. So, like on Sundays, we
yeah,
like to make pizzas. Started off very simple with like them adding the toppings on. And now, once they were 6, they were at the point where they could start off with just all I do is measure the water out and warm it. And then they like, bloom the yeast, they add the flour
neat.
in, and they're using a scale. So we get to talk about numbers a little bit like, okay, let's get close to that. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but like, let's get close. And then they knead it and they work on it and they shape it. And, it's like a nice afternoon where they can come and do a little bit of work and then exit. And they love it.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great story. And I hope more people get in the kitchen with their kids because that is how you learn.
And it's how
I,
people connect with food too. Like it's easy
yeah,
to be a picky eater. I understand some people are just naturally like super
yeah,
tasters or else, and like I won't take that away from them. But like my kids, and then I developed an appreciation for it. And it's just your palate changes over time, and you change, but the exposure is different. And when you're making something, you have a hand in it, and that really gives you more of an investment in trying it out and wanting to like it.
yeah. And I think people do go back and try foods that you maybe didn't like as a kid and you have a totally different experience with it later.
Yeah, like Brussels sprouts.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I made Brussels sprouts for a dinner party once, and one of my friends was aghast. Like literally could not understand why I would be serving Brussels sprouts. And I was like, "Well, have you had them in a while? Go ahead and taste them. They're pretty great." And he loved them, but he was just like, "Remember that time when you had a dinner party and you made Brussels sprouts?" He just thought it was so risky. I was like,
Little,
"Not too
yeah.
risky." Yeah.
A little faith.
Yes, that's right. Well, I'm gonna put links to the book in the show notes and people will follow you. I'll put all that in the show notes. It was great to talk with you, John, and good luck on the book.
Thanks so much for having me over, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to see everybody on my book tour. It starts August 20th.
And will you be coming to Minneapolis by chance?
I will not. I think the closest I'll get is Chicago. But if you're in the neighborhood, come see me. We go to Los Angeles, Dallas, Seattle, Chicago, Atlanta, and New York, and not in that order.
How fun though. Oh, I hope I get to do a book tour sometime. Right now, my books are pretty regional, but someday I'm gonna go on a book tour, I swear.
It's really fun. I see that
Yeah.
visualized in your future.
Yes, I'm manifesting right now. Thanks for being on the program. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. Have a nice
All
day.
right. Okay. Bye-bye.